So the entertainment industry, like companies like Milton Bradley and Hasbro, Parker Brothers, started creating games that were simplified versions of that. Games like Risk and Diplomacy and Stratego, something that the whole family could learn, that captured the ideas but simplified it so that you could play a game out in 20 minutes or a half hour, sometimes in an evening. MIT. A bunch of people in 1961 got their hands on a PDP-1 computer. It had this circular CRT on it, and what's one of the first programs they write? A computer game. They wrote a game called Space War, and it allows two players with joysticks to fly a spaceship around on the screen and to shoot each other down. That was the first interactive computer game, 1961. Those games started appearing in pinball arcades, which we don't even think of as pinball arcades now. They're video arcades. And they showed up in terms of Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Defenders, Robotron, Tempest, you name it. There were thousands and thousands of different kinds of games where they took that war game idea from MIT and brought it into the arcades and charged you to play it 1 quarter at a time. They made millions of dollars. They have to manage time. They have to manage objects. They have to manage events. They are little simple simulations running inside those arcade games. Then in 1972, the arcade games packed up and moved into your house. They connected themselves up to your television, and you played Pong and hockey and handball on your television screen, and you thought it was fantastic that your television could do this. Atari took it another step where you weren't just paddling things around with black and white paddles, but there were actually objects on the game that you could move around, and there were colors. Oh my gosh, colors. And then we went into Nintendo Entertainment System, and we're up to dozens of different systems that have been fielded now. We've primarily narrowed the field to 3 or 4 vendors selling these machines now. Hollywood put out the movie Wargame, and for most people, when you ask them what is a war game, if they've seen this movie, this is all they know about wargaming. Until a few years ago, something like 90% or 95%, a huge percentage of the population, knew nothing about wargaming and simulation except what they saw in this movie. And so the idea of global thermal nuclear war with a computer meant the movie Wargame. That's all they understood. Now it's changed a little since then, but for a long time that was all we knew. A company called id Software fielded a game in 1991 called Hover Tank. Almost nobody noticed. A few people that were very into computer games at that time saw the game, played it. But in 1994 they put out a piece of shareware called Wolfenstein 3D. Everybody saw it. Everybody heard about it. I remember the first time I came into work, yes, I came into work, and the security officer was sitting at his computer playing Wolfenstein 3D. My jaw dropped. I looked at that and said, how can that be? How can a puny little 486 PC do that? And he's running around on the board there and going into 3D worlds and shooting people. I was just astounded. I said, man, this is virtual reality on the desktop. This isn't possible. Well, id Software capitalized on that amazement and sold us Doom, Doom 2, Quake, Quake 2, Quake 3, and who knows what's going to come after Quake 3. But they specialized on this 3D shooter version of computer games. And that we get into the time where almost everybody knows what a simulation is now because they've played games like Wolfenstein and some of the other games on their PC. Now you can't stand still in this environment. A small company called Valve Software last year released a game called Half-Life. Half-Life greatly increased the level of fidelity that you see in the virtual world and the level of interactivity that's possible. The way things interact with you is much higher than is in most of these 3D shooters. You can run around and you can do things that you normally can't do. Push objects over. Objects actually react to your presence there, and you actually can interact with them. The other people on the battlefield also behave much more intelligently than in many of the other games. They will talk to you. They will walk up to you and give you clues of information. The behavior between you and the automated people is much more amazing than what we've seen in games like Quake and Doom. Here's computer war games of the early 90s, mid to early 90s. This game shows the conversion of a hex-based board war game into the computer. Now at first it looked exactly like the board war game. People moved icons around on the battlefield. But then the people that built this said, we can do better than that. We've got a market here. We have to make the icons be individual tanks. And let's turn the barrels on the tanks like they do in the real world. And when we shoot, let's make an explosion sound, and let's have fire and smoke shoot out of the target unit. And all of a sudden this thing becomes more active, more noisy, and it's something that you say, I'll buy that. Even though the algorithms inside are exactly the same as the board war game, the way it looks on the outside is really attractive and sells games really well. From there we went to real-time strategy games. On board war games and on their counterparts in the computer, there's a turn-based operation where you move all your units, and then the other guy moves all his units, and then the two fight. And then you move your units, and then he moves his, and then the two fight. In real-time strategy games, you don't wait for the enemy to finish his turn, and he doesn't wait for you to finish your turn. All of the assets are moving all of the time. And so if you're slow on the draw, if you don't get busy and start ordering your units around, you're going to be overrun. You don't have the luxury of sitting around thinking about what you're going to do the next turn. You have to react. And this real-time strategy approach to gaming has really taken off. Ray-traced graphics make scenes that look like movie-quality computer-generated frames. It takes a long time to generate a frame like this. You can't generate a frame like this in real time right now. Your PC, no matter how good of a graphics card you have, cannot create that scene at 15 or 30 frames a second fast enough for you to play the game. But the hardware manufacturers and the software manufacturers are doing everything they can to make sure that in a few years you can do exactly that. That's exactly the kind of game that you're playing, and those are the kind of graphics that you see on the screen when you play that game. In the military world, I introduced you to virtual, constructive, and live. In the gaming industry, they don't have to build a virtual simulation and a constructive simulation and sell it as two products. They found that they had a market of people who wanted to play a strategy game where they looked down on the battlefield and thought about the allocation of their assets under their control. But they also found that people wanted to watch missiles slamming into ships, to see things exploding on the battlefield. And so they just combined both of them into the same game. And there's a lot of games out now like this one and Force 21 where you can play the battle from both perspectives, where you can see events play out in both the constructive perspective and the virtual perspective. And they'll keep going that way as long as you'll keep paying for it. I mentioned online gaming earlier. Online gaming is the first step toward persistent virtual worlds. The servers that you dial into from your home PC are running that virtual world all the time. There are characters that are always there ready to interact with you. And so when you install this software and fire it up on your computer, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything for one guy playing on one computer by himself. It is simply a portal into a larger virtual world that's controlled by a server. And the server allows you to interact with hundreds of other people doing exactly what you're doing from their homes in Oshkosh and Seattle and Tokyo and Brisbane, from anywhere around the world. So you end up interacting with people in a persistent virtual world and exchanging maybe friendly exchanges or maybe combat exchanges with people you've never met before. But there's always somebody there ready to play, ready to fight against you. There are facilities where you can go and your whole family can have a little flight simulation experience. Maybe you don't have 5 computers in your house and you want to have a dogfight among all the members of your family. Well, you can go to some place like Fighter Town or Flights of Fantasy, and you can all climb into these networked cockpits and have a fun dogfight between each other. That's a form of entertainment that is exactly what military flight simulators provide for pilots. It is exactly the same thing, but now you pay $20 to go in and play at your leisure. A company that has made that a big business is the Battletech arcades. The Battletech arcades first appeared in Chicago. And they created a facility where you could go in, climb into one of these futuristic cockpits, close the door, and you were in control of a mechanized robot. You would tromp around on the battlefield and fight against 8 or 16 other mechanized robots controlled by other people that were paying by the hour to sit in those simulators. That idea initially sounded very exotic, maybe a little too far-fetched. Maybe it won't make it as a commercial business. There are now 24 of those facilities around the world. They're all making lots of money. These things are exactly what the military flight simulators, what the military tank simulators are for military training. They're exactly the same thing.